The Adventure of the Stolen Christmas Gifts. It was upon a sharp, frosty Christmas Eve in the year 1897 that I found myself once more in our old quarters at 221B Baker Street, gazing out upon a London transformed by the season into a scene of rare enchantment. Snow lay thick upon the rooftops, muffling the usual roar of the city, while the gas lamps cast a soft golden glow upon the flakes that still drifted lazily from the heavens. From the street below came the cheerful strains of carol singers, "God rest ye merry gentlemen," mingled with the cries of vendors offering roasted chestnuts and hot elder wine. Shop windows blazed with coloured paper and evergreens, and every passing cab seemed laden with parcels wrapped in bright tissue. I had returned from a brief visit to my wife's relations, and it pleased me greatly to spend the holy evening in the familiar chaos of our sitting room. I had brought with me a modest armful of holly and ivy, and was engaged in fastening sprigs above the mantel, when Sherlock Holmes, stretched upon the sofa in his mouse-coloured dressing gown, glanced up from the violin upon his knee. "Really, Watson," he remarked dryly, "you will transform our scientific laboratory into a grocer's window if you continue in this vein." I had always supposed Christmas decorations to be the province of sentimental housewives and overindulgent paterfamilias. I laughed as I secured a final branch. "Come, Holmes, even you cannot be entirely immune to the spirit of the season. I have heard you play Good King Wenceslas not 5 minutes ago, and with considerable feeling." He gave a slight shrug, but the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "A mere exercise in fingering, my dear fellow. The melody possesses a certain mathematical symmetry." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered with a tray of tea and her excellent plum cake, and we settled ourselves before the roaring fire. The room was warm and bright, the snow whispered against the panes, and for once my friend appeared content to idle away the hours without the stimulus of a case. Yet such tranquillity was not destined to endure. Scarcely had we finished our tea when the bell rang with unusual violence, and presently Mrs. Hudson ushered in a visitor whose appearance spoke of deep distress. She was a woman of middle age, plainly but neatly dressed, with a kind yet careworn face now pale with anxiety. Snowflakes melted upon her bonnet and cloak, and her gloved hands trembled as she clasped them before her. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she inquired in a voice that shook, despite her evident effort at composure. My friend rose and motioned her to the basket chair by the fire. "I am he, madam. Pray be seated and warm yourself. This is Dr. Watson, my friend and colleague." "I am Mrs. Eliza Hawthorne," she began, "matron of St. Nicholas Foundling Home in Bloomsbury. Mr. Holmes, I have come to beg your assistance in a matter that threatens to cast a shadow over the happiest day in the year for 40 innocent children." Holmes's eyes kindled with that familiar gleam. "Proceed, madam. I am all attention." In halting sentences she told her tale. That very morning the children had been full of eager anticipation, for tomorrow, Christmas Day, they were to receive gifts generously provided by a wealthy patron, Mr. Ebenezer Grimsby, dolls and drums, books and battledore, warm scarves and mittens, and a great store of sweets and oranges. All had been locked safely in the storeroom overnight. Yet when the room was opened at dawn, every parcel had vanished. The door had been locked, the single window fastened from within, and no sign of forcible entry could be discovered. The children, upon hearing the news, had been stricken with silent grief. Some of the younger ones had wept bitterly. Worse still, Mr. Grimsby, already a man of uncertain temper, had declared that unless the gifts were recovered by morning, he would withdraw all future support from the home. "I dare not think what Christmas will be for those poor lambs without a single toy or sweet," said Mrs. Hawthorne, her voice breaking. "Mr. Holmes, if there is any man in London who can restore their happiness, it is you." Holmes leaned forward, his thin hands steepled beneath his chin. "A singular problem," he murmured. "A locked storeroom, gifts spirited away like the work of some malevolent Kris Kringle, and the happiness of 40 children hanging in the balance. Watson, fetch your hat and coat. We shall visit this St. Nicholas Foundling Home without delay. The game, it seems, is afoot, even upon Christmas Eve." The snow was falling thickly as our cab rattled through the gaily lit streets toward Bloomsbury, and by the time we alighted before the sombre facade of St. Nicholas Foundling Home, a fresh mantle of white had softened the harsh lines of the old brick building. A group of carol singers stood upon the opposite pavement, their lanterns glowing like stars as they sang, "Once in Royal David's City," and the sweet voices of children from within the home joined faintly in the refrain. Yet the contrast between that cheerful music and the sorrow we were about to encounter struck me with peculiar force. Mrs. Hawthorne led us through a side entrance used by the staff, sparing the children the sight of strangers on this unhappy evening. The corridors were warm and clean, adorned with paper chains and sprigs of mistletoe fashioned by the little ones themselves. But the usual laughter was absent. We passed the common room where the orphans sat quietly about a great Christmas tree, as yet unlit. 40 small faces, pale and subdued, their eyes fixed upon the empty space beneath the branches where presents should have lain. Holmes noticed it all in a single sweeping glance, but made no comment until we reached the storeroom at the rear of the building. A solid chamber with a single stout door, and one high window looking onto a narrow alley now deep in snow. "The gifts were placed here yesterday afternoon," explained the matron, producing her key with trembling fingers. "I locked the door myself at 6 o'clock, and the key has not left my possession. The window was fastened from within, as you see, and the alley gate is padlocked each evening by the watchman." Holmes dropped to his knees the moment the door was opened, his lens flashing in the gaslight as he examined every inch of the bare floorboards. The room was empty save for a few discarded wrappings and a faint, lingering sweetness from the vanished sweets. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Not a panel disturbed, not a board loosened. Yet 40 parcels, some of considerable size, have been removed without trace of violence." He rose and approached the window, scrutinizing the latch and sill with minute care. "Observe, Watson, the faintest of scratches upon the paint here, as though made by a thin blade or wire, and upon the floor beneath, a single holly berry, bright and fresh. Curious, for no holly grows in this room." I bent closer and detected, beneath the prevailing scent of cedar from the missing tree ornaments, a faint but unmistakable aroma of expensive Turkish tobacco. "Pipe smoke," I said. "Someone has smoked in here, and recently." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Precisely. Latakia with a touch of paprika, an uncommon and costly mixture. Our thief, it seems, is a man of means and discriminating taste." We stepped outside into the alley where the snow lay undisturbed save for a single line of footprints leading from the side gate to beneath the storeroom window and back again. The prints were deep on the outward journey, shallower on the return. Clear evidence that a heavy burden had been carried away and then returned. Holmes crouched beside them, measuring with his tape. "A man's boot, size 9, but the heel is worn peculiarly upon the outer edge, the same print both ways. Yet the weight distribution tells a different story, most singular." Mrs. Hawthorne watched anxiously from the doorway. "Can you make anything of it, Mr. Holmes?" He straightened, brushing snow from his gloves. "I can make a great deal of it, madam. The theft was no haphazard affair, but the work of someone familiar with the premises and possessed of unusual ingenuity. We must speak with your night watchman and any others who had access to the building, and I should like a word with young Tommy Briggs, the lad who thought he saw a gentleman in a top hat. As we turned back toward the warmth of the home, the carol singers struck up, "Hark, the herald angels sing," and I confess the words seemed to carry a promise that even on this troubled night, justice and mercy might yet prevail. Mrs. Hawthorne conducted us to a small parlour where the night watchman, a grizzled veteran named Josiah Flint, awaited us with ill-concealed nervousness. He was a stooped figure in a threadbare uniform, twisting his cap between weathered hands. "I swear, sir," he began before Holmes could speak, "I never left my post all night. I made my rounds every hour, and the gate was locked as always. I heard nothing, no creak, no footfall, till the matron's cry at dawn." Holmes regarded him with that penetrating stare which seemed to strip away all pretense. "Your pipe, Mr. Flint. May I examine it?" The man produced a battered clay stained with years of coarse shag. Holmes sniffed the bowl and handed it back. "Not the tobacco I detected in the storeroom. Yours is honest bird's eye. You are cleared upon that point, at least." Flint exhaled in relief, but Holmes continued. "You mentioned seeing no one, yet a boy, Tommy Briggs, claims to have glimpsed a tall gentleman in a top hat near the gate at midnight." "I saw no such person," insisted Flint, "though the snow was falling heavy-like and the lamps are dim in the alley." We next spoke with the former employee, a sullen cook, who had been dismissed a fortnight earlier for pilfering coal. He was discovered at a nearby doss house nursing a pint with surly companions. His alibi was solid. Half a dozen witnesses placed him there from dusk till morning, and his boots were coarse clogs bearing no resemblance to the prints in the snow. It was young Tommy Briggs who proved the most interesting witness. The lad, a bright-eyed boy of 12 with a mop of auburn hair, had been awakened by thirst and peered from a dormitory window overlooking the alley. "I saw him clear as day, sir," he told us eagerly. "A tall gent in a black topper and cape standing by the gate just as the clock struck 12. He looked up at the home, straight at the storeroom window, I'd swear, then melted away into the snow like a ghost." Holmes questioned him closely, but the boy's story held firm in every particular. "Excellent observation, Master Briggs," said my friend with rare warmth. "You have the makings of a detective." As we returned to the parlour, Mrs. Hawthorne supplied a further detail. The principal donor, Mr. Ebenezer Grimsby, had visited the home only the previous afternoon to inspect the gifts. He had been in high dudgeon over some trifling delay in the delivery of oranges, and had departed in a huff, yet not before lingering unusually long in conversation with the matron about the security of the storeroom. "And Mr. Grimsby," she added hesitantly, "is known to favour a very particular blend of Turkish tobacco, Latakia, I believe, imported specially from a shop in Bond Street." Holmes's lean face sharpened with interest. "Indeed? And was Mr. Grimsby wearing a top hat upon his visit?" "Why, yes, he always does. A tall silk one, quite old-fashioned." I could see the wheels turning in my friend's mind. "Watson," he said quietly as we stepped once more into the snowy alley, "we have a pretty little problem here. The footprints that go and return, the scratches at the window, the hollyberry, the expensive tobacco, all point to a thief who entered without breaking and departed with his booty. Yet young Tommy's gentleman in the top hat suggests a reconnaissance the day before. I confess I begin to suspect our philanthropic Mr. Grimsby himself of staging the theft for some ulterior purpose, perhaps publicity, perhaps insurance, perhaps simple spite. But would a man rob orphans of their Christmas merely for gain?" I protested. Holmes's lips tightened. "Men have done worse for less, Watson. Yet there is one detail that does not fit, the returning footprints, shallower on the inward journey. That suggests the burden was carried away, then brought back. But why?" He stood motionless in the falling snow for a long minute, his eyes half closed, the flakes settling upon his deerstalker. No, he said at last. Grimsby is not our man. The truth lies in another direction entirely. Upward, I fancy. He glanced toward the roof line where the storeroom abutted an empty house next door, its chimney stark against the whitening sky. Come, Watson, we must examine the premises above. The thief, I believe, came not through door or window, but down the chimney like St. Nicholas himself, though with far less benevolent intent. Holmes's words sent us hurrying next door to the empty house, whose to-let board creaked dismally in the wind. The caretaker, roused from his Christmas Eve slumbers, admitted us with grudging ill-grace, and we mounted the dusty stairs to the attic that ran the full length of the building, directly above the storeroom of the Foundling Home. The air was bitter cold and thick with cobwebs, but Holmes's lantern soon revealed what he sought, a clear disturbance in the thick dust upon the floorboards, a broad swath where something heavy had been dragged, and a scatter of soot near the chimney breast. "Behold, Watson," said he, pointing triumphantly. "Our thief descended this chimney, crossed the attic, prized up the loose board that forms the ceiling of the storeroom below, note the fresh scratches upon the joists, and lowered himself and the parcels by rope. The hollyberry came from a sprig caught in his coat as he brushed past the decorations in the corridor below." "But the returning footprints?" I asked, still puzzled. "Simple. Having concealed the gifts elsewhere, he returned by the same route to cover his traces and perhaps to retrieve some forgotten item. The sack was empty on the return journey, hence the shallower prints. We followed the trail of soot to the far chimney, where a few strands of expensive Latakia tobacco clung to the brickwork. Dropped, no doubt, as the thief paused to relight his pipe in the darkness. Holmes straightened, his face alight with satisfaction. "The method is clear. The motive and the man remain to be discovered. Mrs. Hawthorne mentioned that Mr. Grimsby has an estranged nephew, Percival Grimsby, who has long coveted the family property that funds the orphanage. A word with my tobacconist in Bond Street will confirm whether this nephew purchases the same rare blend." Even as he spoke, a clock in the distance struck 10, reminding us that Christmas morning was fast approaching. "Come, Watson," cried Holmes, already descending the stairs two at a time. "We must reach that tobacconist before he closes for the night, and then to the nephew's lodgings. If we are not too late, the children of St. Nicholas shall yet have their Christmas." We plunged back into the snowy streets, the bells of London ringing out across the rooftops as though in celebration of the chase. Behind us, the Foundling Home's windows glowed faintly, and I fancied I could see the little faces pressed against the panes, watching the swirling flakes and hoping, against hope, that Father Christmas had not forgotten them after all. The tobacconist in Bond Street, though preparing to close, confirmed Holmes's suspicion upon sight of my friend's card. Mr. Percival Grimsby had indeed purchased 2 ounces of the rare Latakia blend, only that morning. His lodgings, a modest set of rooms in Half Moon Street, were but a short cab ride away. We arrived just as the clocks of London were striking 11. Snow still fell heavily, blanketing the streets in silence broken only by the distant peal of church bells. Lestrade, whom Holmes had summoned by a hasty note, joined us at the door with 2 constables, their bull's-eye lanterns cutting golden paths through the whirling flakes. The landlady, flustered at this late invasion, admitted us with muttered protests. Percival Grimsby, a thin, sharp-featured man in his 30s, with the same cold eyes as his uncle, was discovered in his sitting room, a half-packed valise upon the table and a railway timetable open before him. His surprise at our entrance swiftly turned to defiance. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded. Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "The meaning, Mr. Percival Grimsby, is that the game is up. You have stolen the Christmas gifts intended for the children of St. Nicholas Foundling Home, hoping thereby to discredit your uncle's charity and force him to sell the family property, which you covet. Your rare tobacco betrayed you at the scene. Your chimney descent left traces any child could read, and the recovered parcels will be found, I fancy, in that large portmanteau in the corner. Grimsby's face went livid. With a sudden oath he sprang toward the fireplace, seizing a poker as though to strike. But Lestrade was too quick for him. The little detective pinioned his arms while the constables secured him with handcuffs. A search of the portmanteau revealed the missing gifts, neatly packed and labelled, ready for disposal on the morrow. The rope and grappling hook used for the chimney descent were discovered hidden behind a wardrobe, together with a dark lantern and the thin wire that had scratched the storeroom window frame. Grimsby, seeing resistance futile, sank into a chair and poured out a sullen confession. Embittered by years of exclusion from his uncle's favour, he had conceived the plan to ruin the old man's reputation for generosity. By stealing the gifts and letting blame fall upon the home staff, he hoped to drive Ebenezer Grimsby to abandon the charity and sell the valuable Bloomsbury property, of which Percival was the sole heir presumptive. As the constables led him away into the snowy night, Holmes turned to me with a quiet smile. "A sordid little plot, Watson, but one that might have blighted 40 young lives. Come, we have just time to restore Father Christmas to his proper duties." We loaded the recovered parcels into a waiting cab and sped back through the silent streets toward Bloomsbury, the bells now ringing midnight and the snow ceasing at last to reveal a sky bright with stars. We reached St. Nicholas Foundling Home just as the first pale light of Christmas morning crept over the snow-laden roofs of Bloomsbury. The streets were silent save for the distant chime of church bells calling the faithful to early service, and our cab's wheels crunched softly upon the fresh fall. Mrs. Hawthorne met us at the door, her face pale with sleepless anxiety, but her eyes widened with joy as we carried in the recovered parcels, every doll, every toy soldier, every bag of sweets restored as though by magic. "Mr. Holmes," she cried, tears starting to her cheeks, "you have wrought a miracle." "No miracle, madam," replied my friend with a slight bow. "Merely the application of observation and logic. The true miracle is the generosity that provided these gifts in the first place, and the resilience of childhood hope." We bore the parcels into the common room, where the great Christmas tree stood waiting, its unlit candles gleaming in the grey dawn. The children, roused early by the matron's excited summons, gathered round in their nightgowns, eyes wide with wonder. Little Tommy Briggs was foremost among them, his freckled face breaking into a grin as he recognized his promised wooden locomotive among the returned treasures. In a trice, the parcels were arranged beneath the tree, the candles kindled, and the room filled with gasps of delight and cries of, "Father Christmas has come after all." The carol singers, who had returned at dawn, as was their custom, struck up, "O come, all ye faithful," outside the windows, and soon the orphans' voices joined in, sweet and clear. Even Mr. Ebenezer Grimsby arrived shortly after, summoned by a note from Holmes. The old gentleman blustered at first upon hearing of his nephew's villainy, but when he saw the children's happiness, his stern features softened. He declared gruffly that the home should have double its usual allowance in future, and that any nephew of his who could conceive such a heartless scheme was no kin of his. As the morning brightened and the children fell upon their presents with shouts of glee, I noticed Holmes standing a little apart, watching the scene with an expression I had seldom seen upon his austere countenance, something approaching quiet contentment. Later, when the excitement had subsided a little, and the orphans were absorbed in their new treasures, Tommy Briggs approached us shyly, bearing a magnificent mechanical train set, clockwork engine, tender, and carriages complete, far grander than any of the original gifts. "Matron says this one came special with no name on it," said the boy, "but I think it's from you, Mr. Holmes." My friend raised an eyebrow in feigned surprise. "From me? My dear lad, I am sure I know nothing of it. Perhaps Father Christmas left it behind on his sleigh. Tommy grinned knowingly, but said nothing more, and Holmes turned away to hide what might have been the faintest flush upon his cheek. As we took our leave and stepped out into the crisp Christmas sunshine, the bells of London ringing out in joyous peals, I could not forbear remarking upon the change in my companion. "A touching scene, Holmes. I confess I did not expect to see you play Father Christmas so convincingly." He shrugged into his ulster and lit his pipe with deliberate care. "Sentiment is not without its uses, Watson," he replied. "In this instance it served to expose a scoundrel and restore equilibrium. Besides, the problem presented several points of interest: the chimney descent, the false footprints, the tobacco clue. One must take one's stimulation where one finds it, even at Yuletide. Yet as our cab bore us back toward Baker Street through the gleaming snow, I caught him gazing out at the happy groups upon the pavements, families bound for church, children pulling new sledges, lovers walking arm in arm. And I knew that for once, Sherlock Holmes had found satisfaction not merely in the triumph of reason, but in the simple joy of a kindness done in secret. Thus ended our adventure of the stolen Christmas gifts, a tale which, though small in the annals of crime, remains for me one of the brightest memories of those years I spent at the side of the greatest and wisest man I have ever known. A very Merry Christmas to one and all. Your faithful friend, John H. Watson, M.D.